Football Show. My name is Paul Witwer, and I am the host of this podcast. If you are listening on YouTube, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button down below to help the channel. If you want more content like this, please visit thepaulstopshere.com. This is the first installment of the Paul Witwer Football Show. So to give you a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm starting this podcast, I am a University of North Texas journalism student, and I want to focus on football, basketball, and that sort of content after school. Right now, though, I really just love football, and I've always wanted to start a podcast about NFL football and college football. So this is that opportunity. Just to kind of get this out of the way, I am a Green Bay Packers fan, been a lifelong Green Bay Packers fan. I was born in 95, so I caught the tail end of Brett Favre's career and obviously all of Aaron Rodgers' career. So that is, I do have a little bit of bias there. I'll try to avoid it as much as possible and be as realistic as possible with that team, but I'm just putting that out there. Also, I've kind of started to get into fantasy football as well. I don't know if I want to make this fully a fantasy football podcast or not, but I thought I would bring up my two fantasy football leagues just kind of as a fun thing to do each week. My first fantasy football team is the fantasy league that I've been running now since I think 2015 with all of my friends. They don't really take it too seriously. We try to have fun with it. But I think I've won that almost every single year except for last year when my dad finally dethroned me in the last, obviously in the championship game. Also, I joined another fantasy football league. This one, obviously a lot more serious, $50 pay-in. It's my cousin's league that he's been running for a while, and it's a 2 QB league. So it's definitely really weird for me. I haven't done well in that league at all. I've been miserable. Every year I go in kind of trying to draft it like I do normal fantasy draft, and by the time the later rounds come in where I'd normally draft a quarterback, it's always undoubtedly just awful quarterbacks. So this year I'm going to try to do it a little bit differently, maybe have some more success, but you never know. So for this episode, I just want to do kind of a division preview. I want to do the NFC first. We'll start with the North, do the NFC North, the NFC East, NFC South, and then end with the NFC West. I went through every single team's roster. I went through their entire schedule, and I have predicted, kind of got my crystal ball out and predicted how each team will finish and kind of what their positive and negatives will be for their team, and kind of explaining why I think they will finish where they'll finish in their division. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. I'm actually going to go from last place to first place. So whatever team finishes last will go 4, 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of, so we can spend a little bit more time and just kind of jump into the teams here. So starting with the NFC North, in last place, I have the Chicago Bears. So to kind of start, the Chicago Bears, I think personally, unfortunately, is not just me being a Packers fan and not liking the Bears. I just don't think this roster is where it needs to be to win football games. I don't really even think they want to win football games. Obviously, no team wants to tank or do any of that, but they are really hamstrung by their salary cap and some of the moves that they've had to make. Obviously, they had to get rid of Khalil Mack and send him to the Chargers. So they're a rebuilding team. They understand that. They want to go forward, hopefully with Justin Fields. As kind of my first positive here, Justin Fields. I really, really, really liked Justin Fields coming out of Ohio State. I thought he should have been the second quarterback taken. Obviously, teams thought otherwise. But I really like Justin Fields. I think he has great mobility. I think he throws one of the most accurate in college football. He was the best deep ball thrower in the country, and I think that has translated to the NFL. So I think, with their new offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, coming over from the Green Bay Packers, I think they're going to focus on throwing down the football. Another thing I like is their young secondary. Jalen Johnson was awesome last season, especially when he went up against Devontae Adams. He actually really did very well. So I think he'll continue to get better. And I like Kyler Gordon, second-round pick out of Washington. I thought he went kind of late for where I thought he would go. I thought he would go even potentially bottom of the first round and even higher in the second round. But I think the Bears got really good player for that position in the draft at pick 39. Also, Jaquan Brisker, another really good player that I liked. He came from Penn State, second round, pick 48. Just an all-around safety. I think he can do anything. I really think he could play free safety, but obviously when you have Jackson back there, Eddie Jackson, you're going to put him in his best role, which is obviously free safety. Another positive I have is Cole Kmet. Really think he'll take a leap. I think that Luke Getsy will really want to focus on using tight ends. And then obviously I also think Robert Quinn is going to have another big season. He's probably one of those players who, if he's having a really good season and he stays healthy, he's going to get traded in the middle of the season, and they're just going to try and get picks for him. Some of the negatives. I really think the Bears did a poor job of surrounding Justin Fields with good talent in this draft. I think they could have done a lot more to get value players on the offensive side of the football. I think they did a really good job of that doing on the defensive side, but on the offensive side, they just didn't do much of anything at all. I think Darnell Mooney is a really good wide receiver. I think he's a really good 2, or it would be an excellent 3. Obviously, if he was a 3 on any team, they would have probably one of the better offenses in the NFL. But I think he's a really excellent 2, just not a 1. Obviously, he could prove me wrong. It's not the first time that's happened. Another thing, their offensive line is awful. I hate to be too mean on players and position groups, but this offensive line is not going to be good. Justin Fields is going to be running for his life all year long, and that is not good for a young quarterback's development. Braxton Jones, coming out of Southern Utah, I liked him in the draft as a developmental project. They got him in the 5th round, and he's going to be starting at left tackle. I would not have pictured that in a million years. I would have put him as a backup tackle, swing tackle, who has starter potential on the right side. But having Braxton Jones start on the left side immediately is really concerning. So ultimately, I have them finishing 3-14 this year, really taking a step back from last season. They won 7 games last season. I'm not really sure how, but they did. Again, I think Robert Quinn had massive impact on the defense with getting 15 sacks his career year, but obviously he's much older now. He's one of those players who has always seemed old, but he's never really been old, and now he's just actually old. So they're probably going to try and move off of him as quickly as possible. The wins I have them getting are against Houston, Detroit, and Atlanta. Again, I feel like those rosters are roughly around the same level as the Bears, and I just don't see them winning there's a couple other teams they could beat, maybe the Giants, New England, if that's going poorly. They play Washington at home, so they could pick up a couple more wins and surprise people, but ultimately I think 3 to 5 wins is where they're going to end up. Next, I have in this division the Detroit Lions. Positives right out the gate. Dan Campbell. I think these players want to play for Dan Campbell. He's a football guy. Football dude, knows ball, and he's just that dude. And I think players really respond to that. So I think that they'll continue to fight. They were scrappy last season, and they'll just continue to be scrappy this season. But they have more talent. That's the difference. Some other positives. The offensive line. I think Penei Sewell is going to take another step. I really like Taylor Decker a lot as their left tackle, Penei Sewell as their right tackle, Frank Ragnow as their center. I just think they have really, really, really good offensive line. And that's what kind of, I think, separates them from the Bears. I just think their offensive line is just light years ahead of where the Bears is. Another positive, I really like their receivers as well. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he's a great over-the-middle kind of gadget receiver that can do everything, get yards after catch. He's got great hands, and he's a lot faster, I think, than a lot of people thought. The other two wide receivers I really like DJ Chark, who they got from the Jaguars. I think he's a really big field-stretching number one receiver. He's going to get a lot more attention in this offense than he did with Jacksonville. And then Josh Reynolds, I think he's a great number 3 to start out the season. I really liked everything he did with the Rams, and I think he's going to run in this offense really well. Obviously, Jameson Williams, whenever they get him back, he's going to slot in probably for Josh Reynolds, maybe potentially DJ Chark, and they're just going to take off, and they're going to be one of the best receiving corps in the NFL. So for that reason, another reason why I just think they're just there. They're ready to kind of take that next step as opposed to the Lions, opposed to the Bears, who are clearly taking a step back at almost every offensive position, except for obviously quarterback. Another positive, they have Aiden Hutchinson. I think Aiden Hutchinson is NFL ready. I thought he should have been the first pick. I like Trayvon Walker going to the Jaguars. Don't get me wrong. Really great player. Tons of upside. Athletic freak. Aiden Hutchinson, I think, is ready to go now. He will immediately impact this franchise, not only with his attitude, but with his play. I just think he has a chance to potentially get 10 sacks and have tons of tackles for loss. That's exactly what he did at Michigan. He already showed that in the preseason. He had that huge tackle for loss in the first preseason game. And obviously, if you're watching Hard Knocks, you see all of those things. You see how well he's playing and how well he's doing in training camp. So I just think he's immediately going to be great. Some of the negatives. Their linebacking crew, their middle linebackers specifically. Alec Anzalone, I believe that's how it's pronounced, Alex Anzalone, came over from the Saints. He's just not really going to cut it. And they have, I think, Malcolm Rodriguez, who I liked coming out of Oklahoma State. He's really, really, really smart player and also really athletic. He's just, I think he's more developmental, and they're going to probably have those two guys start. Also, Jared Goff. Jared Goff is mostly a net negative, but can sometimes be a positive. It just depends how much protection he gets and how good the defense he's going up against is. Against bad defenses, he looks really good. And if he's a quarterback who needs help. He needs to be schemed into being successful. And I just don't know how much that's going to happen in this offense. I hope that his receivers are just good enough for him to be able for them to just be more open than not. So he can really do well this year. If not, though, again, he's going to kind of just be a net negative, unfortunately. I wish I was a big Jared Goff fan. But unfortunately, the Super Bowl when he was with the Rams, and then the year after that, he just kind of fell off, and he couldn't. He kind of he's plateaued as a quarterback, as a young quarterback, and that's something that you don't want to see. Another negative, I think, is DeAndre Swift's inconsistencies. DeAndre Swift is such a confusing player because I think he could be really, really good, but for some reason he's just okay. Again, this is another one that could be a positive but is more of a net negative. I think the team really wants to rely on him. And that's kind of what I've seen from Hard Knocks. I don't know how true that is, but from Hard Knocks, that's kind of what I see, is them wanting to lean on him. And I just don't necessarily know if that's a good idea. I would rather them throw the ball more in this offense with all those great wide receivers that they have. So ultimately, I'm probably a little bit higher on the Detroit Lions than some people. I just think if you've got a good offensive line, you can do really good things in the NFL. You can surprise a lot of people. And obviously, if the offensive line is really good, DeAndre Swift is going to be better. That's just how the NFL works. So ultimately, I think they're 8-9. I think they could lose some games. If Miami, I have them beating Miami kind of in the middle of the season as sort of a surprise win. I have them beating Green Bay, and obviously we'll get to them later. I have them beating Jacksonville. So if Jacksonville or Miami's even better than I think they're going to be, then they could lose some more games, be 6-11. But ultimately, I think their range is going to be 6-11. And I think the highest they could be is, I would be shocked if they got 10 wins. So 8-9, 9-8, I think is kind of their ceiling. Next, I've got the Minnesota Vikings. A lot of people really high on the Minnesota Vikings, this offseason. I'm not entirely sure why people are picking them to win the division. I think they're a really good football team. I think that they are going to make the playoffs as a wild card team. And yeah, could they potentially push the Packers, who are obviously, if I've got the Vikings second, I'm going to have the Packers first. Obviously, I think they could push the Packers if things go right for them. But the defense, I don't think is there yet. I like Cam Dantzler. I don't think he's a number one corner. And Patrick Peterson on the other side, he's just a little bit too old. He's just a little bit too much past his prime, I think. He's 32, going to be 33 during the season. That's just a little bit too old. And he's had too many injuries. Obviously, I think their safety play is going to be awesome. Harrison Smith, is a great safety. Even he's getting a little bit older here. He's going to be 33, 34 and during the season. That's really old for a safety. Another player who I think is going to be really good for them and who they got in the first round is Lewis Seen. I think he's going to be great for them. He was just kind of a do-it-all safety. I thought he was the best safety in the draft, personally, just because he could do everything. He has the speed, great tackler, great instincts. He can play free safety, strong safety. He could even play in the slot if you wanted him to. So I thought that was a really good pick for them. Obviously, you have their receivers, Justin Jefferson, who's going to be the best receiver in this division now with Devontae Adams gone, and you've got Adam Thielen. Again, though, with Adam Thielen, he's older. He's 32, going to be 33 during the season, I believe. So, actually, no, he just turned 32. So he's going to be 32 throughout the season. Still, that's getting on the older side, and he's dealt with injuries for the past couple of years. That being said, Justin Jefferson is so good. He will make up for all of the deficiencies they have in the wide receiver room. And he's going to potentially have the most yards and maybe the most touchdowns in the NFL this season. He's just that good. Another player who I think is going to be great for them, obviously Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is one of the better backs in the NFL. I think he's a top 5 back. If healthy, he could be a top 3 back. Ultimately, though, I think he's a top 5 back in the NFL. And as long as he stays as long as he stays healthy, he will be good. He is that good of a player, and they will definitely can push the Packers if he stays healthy all season. Another positive, I really like their D-line and their pass rushers. Dalvin Tomlinson, really, really like. I love Danielle Hunter. Again, if he can stay healthy, that's kind of the overarching theme of the Vikings, is a lot of their key players have health concerns. Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith, they have just not shown a track record of staying healthy. Zadarius Smith had back problems. He's getting older. He's 29, going to be 30. 30-year-old edge rusher with back problems is not something you want to see. And Danielle Hunter's younger. He's 27, 28 in his prime. But again, he's had injuries throughout his career. He's not really shown that he can stay healthy. So again, that is a problem. On to the negatives. Kirk Cousins. Kirk is the standard for, I know a lot of other podcasts and shows, they kind of have him as kind of their baseline of if you're a great quarterback or a not good quarterback. He's kind of that middle line for everybody. Ultimately, I see Kirk Cousins as kind of a negative and a positive. I mean, that's obviously where a lot of other people see him as well. His negatives are he just does not play well outside of structure. Not only does he not play well outside of structure, a lot of times he doesn't even try to. If the play is not designed, doesn't come out correctly as designed, oftentimes he'll just throw it away or throw it into the dirt. So I think that's a negative. However, it can also be a positive because Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen tend to be open a lot, and Dalvin Cook. And I like KJ Osborne a little bit too. If those guys are open, which they often are, then he's great. I know PFF had him as their 6th rated quarterback with an 88.2 overall grade. That's really great. He had a really great season last year, but they only went 8-9. So it's kind of difficult for me to have this team make a significant jump with a new offensive coordinator, with a new defensive coordinator. Mike Zimmer made this defense really good, and they're not very talented. They were even less talented last season. And Mike Zimmer has pulled this defense along, and now they're got a new defensive coordinator, and they're not much more talented. I think adding Zadarius Smith will really help them, and Lewis Cine. But outside of that, Eric Kendricks is great, but still. Also, their offensive line. I'm just not sold on their offensive line yet. I think it's okay. I think their interior is not very good. Bradbury has consistently just not been able to be better than a average to below average center. And I know a lot of people had him pegged as being one of the next great centers, and he just hasn't been able to show that. Ezra Cleveland, out of Boise State, I just don't really see it yet. I think these guys can get better, but I'm just not there yet with them. I think I like Christian Darrisaw and I like Brian O'Neill, but I just don't see them being a positive for this team yet. That could change. So for right now, I've got the Vikings going 10-7. And first place team, no surprise here, the Green Bay Packers. Let's go with the positives. Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, NFL MVP last season. He was fantastic. Again, back-to-back MVP. What else can you say? Obviously, he's getting a little bit older, not as mobile. That's a little bit concerning. And not having Davante Adams. I would be lying to you if I said that I wasn't worried that Davante Adams wasn't there. Davante Adams is the best wide receiver in the NFL, in my opinion. So not having the best wide receiver and not really replacing him, obviously you can't replace Davante Adams. He's one of a kind. He's the best in the NFL. There's no one single player you can replace him with. But just replacing him with Allen Lazard and Sammy Watkins, I'm not too convinced that they're going to... Obviously, Sammy Watkins has really not been healthy since Buffalo. And that was a long time ago. It was 2015 was his best season with Buffalo. But when you have Aaron Rodgers, he can make up for a lot of those deficiencies. Aaron Rodgers has done it for his entire career. When he came in and he was a starter, they already had great receivers, and then he kept kind of helping younger receivers along. Jordy Nelson, James Jones, Randall Cobb, Davante Adams, all of those guys, Aaron Rodgers has helped get them into the position that they were, where they were excellent players in the NFL. Moving on, I think the Packers defensive line, defense in general, I'm just going to lump it into defense in general and kind of go position by position. Their defensive line is going to be the best that they've had since the 90s, since when they won those Super Bowls with Brett Favre. Kenny Clark, Jarran Reed, Dean Lowry, I could go on and on about how great that defensive line is going to be. The days of the Packers defensive line not being able to stop the run, that's over. That's gone. Their edge rushers, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, one of the best edge rushing duos in the NFL. Rashawn Gary has continued to get better every year he's been in the NFL, and he was one of the top edge rushers in terms of pressures, which are more indicative of how good you are as a pass rusher than sacks. Sacks are great, don't get me wrong. Obviously, you kind of want those guys to finish plays, but pressures are more indicative of how good you are as an edge rusher. Rashawn Gary, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL last season. I think he'll continue on that trend. Next, Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker are middle linebackers. Sorry, not our. I know that was a little bit of a Freudian slip up there. They're middle linebackers, not our. They're middle linebackers. Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker. Devondre Campbell came out of nowhere last season. I was not expecting that. I don't think anyone in the NFL is expecting that. He was really good with with the Falcons. I thought he was pretty solid, but obviously if you're first team All-Pro, that's a huge jump. And he was a late pickup in the offseason, really cheap contract, and he proved it and obviously got a big contract this season. Quay Walker, the first round pick for the Packers, I think he's going to be fantastic this season. Next, the corners, and we'll do the secondary in general. Jair Alexander, I think, is the second best corner in the NFL. They're going to get him back healthy. So obviously that's going to make this defense that I think showed real improvement throughout the year, even dealing with the injuries that they did. They're going to show real improvement with, obviously, if you're going to get the second best cornerback, then you're going to be off to the races. And then I think their first round pick from last season, Eric Stokes, showed real improvement. I thought he was one of the better rookie corners last season. Him and Patrick Surtain, I think, were probably the two best rookie corners. And I like J.C. Horn as well. He was good, but he was injured as well. So it was kind of hard to judge him. But I think Eric Stokes is one of those guys. He's got the speed. I think if he can just track the ball in the air, he will continue to grow as a player. Adrian Amos is one of the best safeties in the NFL. I think he kind of gets underrated, and I'm not sure exactly why, because he can do free safety, strong safety. He's a solid tackler. He's always right where he's supposed to be. I'm not sure why he kind of always gets left out of kind of these safety conversations, but I really do think he is one of those players who can be really good. And Darnell Savage, lots of talent, hasn't quite lived up to that first round billing just yet, but maybe in this final season or in his fourth season, he can finally take that step and kind of take reins of that free safety position. And obviously, Rasul Douglas, he can do it all. I think Rasul Douglas, he's mostly going to play slot corner. I think he'll play some edge corners or some boundary corner as well. He did that for the Packers last season with Jair out, and I think he could play some safety too. So when you've got a player like that who can kind of do everything and he's good at everything, you really have a Band-Aid for that secondary if anyone gets hurt. On to the negatives. The wide receiver group is unproven at best. I am a huge fan of Allen Lazard. I think he's been great for this team. Excellent blocker, excellent big slot. We'll see how he does on the outside. I think with Devontae taking a majority of the targets last season, I think sometimes he kind of got hidden. So now he'll see some more targets, and I think we'll kind of really see if he can be. I don't see him being a 1. I think some of the rookies who are going to come through, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, I think those guys will eventually develop into those first receivers, but we'll see if Lazard can be a number 2. Randall Cobb is older. I just don't see when he's healthy and he'll have, 2 or 3 really good games like he did last season. I just don't see him contributing really past that. Sammy Watkins is really the big unknown. I am not sure what to expect from Sammy Watkins. I think Sammy obviously has been a number 1 in the league before, mostly a 2 or a 3 because he just gets hurt too much. I don't think he'll last a full 17 games. He's going to be hurt. And obviously the rookies, we'll see what we have with them, but it's a real concern. The offensive line is just not healthy right now. Bakhtiari's still coming back from that. Obviously, he had a really bad ACL tear. From what he said, it was more than an ACL tear. It wasn't just an average ACL tear. Elton Jenkins, our other tackle, guard, center, can play everything. Excellent player. If he can, come back from that ACL, I think a little bit faster than what many people expect, I think we'll be better off. But right now we've got Royce Newman playing tackle, right guard, Jake Hansen playing right guard. I'm just not sold on those guys yet. I've seen them play in the preseason. Obviously, I'm a Packers fan, so I kind of watch them a little bit more than I watch other teams. Not saying I don't watch other teams. Obviously, I watch all these other teams, but I tend to watch the Packers a little bit more for obvious reasons. Royce Newman, I'm just not sold that he can be a right tackle in the NFL. I think he can develop into a really good guard, but I'm just not sold on him right tackle. Same with Jake Hansen. Myers at center, I think he'll continue to improve. I think he's really talented, really athletic. And I like John Runyon at left guard. And, and I like Josh Nyman as kind of a swing tackle, but I'm just not sold on that O-line going into the season. I think they're going to have, if those guys don't come back healthy, they're going to have a really rough beginning of the season. And obviously, I think there's questions about this team's depth, especially on the defensive side of the football. Outside of Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary, their 3rd, 4th, 5th edge rushers are undrafted guys or rookies. I think they can get better I think they can, improve into that role, and obviously that's what you want to see. But going into the season, there's just depth issues, and I think at the corner position, outside of Alexander Stokes and Douglas, a lot of guys, a lot of lower draft picks, a lot of undrafted free agents who just haven't been tested, and obviously the wide receiver room, the starting guys are untested. So obviously the depth the guys are in question. All right. And now we can kind of move to a new division. Let's go to the NFC East. So in last place of that division, I have the Washington Commanders. The Washington Commanders I don't think they have a bad roster. So it's not like the Bears, where I think the Bears have just not a good roster. There's no way they can compete in the NFL playing that many rookies and that many unproven players. The Commanders have some talent. I think obviously their defensive line with Chase Young, Allen Payne, and Sweat, those guys are great. Obviously, Chase Young, I believe, is starting on the PUP, so he's going to at least miss the first 4 weeks. That's really rough for them. They need to pick up wins wherever they can, and I think without Chase Young, that's going to be very difficult. Another positive for this team, I really like their wide receiver room. I think it's awesome. I think it's one of the better wide receiver rooms in the league. I think outside of having a bigger boundary receiver, I think they've got obviously Terry McLaurin, who's criminally underrated. He's one of the best route runners in the NFL. Unfortunately, he's in there in Washington where he won't really ever be seen by the majority of people. He's really great. And I think he will be really great this year. Will obviously get the majority of targets. I really like their first round pick, Jahan Dotson. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's a really great complement, I think, to what Terry McLaurin does. He's a really great route runner, and I think he was a really good contested catch guy out of Penn State, and produced a lot more, I think, this year than a lot of people thought last year than a lot of people thought he would. Then obviously Curtis Samuel. If Curtis Samuel can stay healthy, he's the perfect gadget slot, hybrid running back player in the NFL. And I think he'll be really good for this football team. Really easy for Carson Wentz to get the ball out of his hands and into his playmakers' hands. That's kind of what this wide receiver group is. A lot of yak dudes, a lot of speed, a lot of shiftiness. So I think that is their kind of their biggest positives. The negatives. Running backs. I don't know who's going to start for this team. It's really kind of up in the air. I'm a little confused. Is it really going to be J.D. McKissick? I doubt it. I know their rookie they really like, whose name is escaping me right now. They really like him. And then, so, Carson Wentz kind of needs that run game to be successful because he's just not consistently accurate enough, consistently good enough of a decision maker to not have a decent run game. He can't carry a team on his shoulders despite all of his best attempts, because he will try. That is Carson. He will try to carry the team on his shoulders. Next, I really like their corners. I think William Jackson and Kendall Fuller are really, really, really good corners. They are. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Their corners, William Jackson, Kyle Fuller. I accidentally put them in the negatives and they should have been in the positive. I like both of their corners. They're a little bit older, but I think that especially William Jackson, he's on 30, he's going to be 30. I think that they're actually really going to be good for this team next season. I think their defense will be better than it was last season. They were kind of really struggling last season, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's their middle linebacker play, which I have as a negative, going back to the negatives now. Again, I thought Jamin Davis they picked way too high. I liked him coming out of Kentucky. I thought he was an athletic freak, a lot of upside, but I didn't think he was quite ready to start or be the focal point of a defense. Cole Holcomb, kind of the same thing. I'm just not sold on him. I think he does a decent job in the middle, but he's just not quite there. And obviously, David Mayo had a really good 2016 year and 2019, but he just hasn't really been the same since. So I think their linebackers are probably what's going to hold this defense back. And obviously, the biggest negative on this team, Carson Wentz. I've seen enough of Carson Wentz. Obviously, he was great that 1 year for the Eagles where he almost won MVP and then unfortunately broke his leg. But since then, he's jumped around, obviously. He was on the Eagles for another year, wasn't very good, was on the Colts last year, and then was traded to Washington for pennies on the dollar. And I just don't see it. His decision making is suspect. He is consistently inaccurate with the football. And I just don't see him improving those things. I just don't see him getting better at this stage in his career. He's going to be 30. And I just don't see it. So next, and their record. I have them going 5-12. I think they can pick up an early win against Jacksonville and some late wins against Atlanta, Cleveland, and Chicago. I think their roster is slightly better than some of those other teams like Atlanta, Chicago. And I just think Cleveland's under way too much distress right now to really push too much in the AFC. So I think 5-12 is kind of towards their ceiling. Would I be surprised if their defense got them to 6 wins? No. Would I be surprised if Carson Wentz got them to 3 wins? Also no. But I think 5 is a nice, happy kind of middle ground. Maybe kind of getting I have some higher expectations for them than I think a lot of people do. Next in the division, I've got the Giants. The Giants are a really, 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 really interesting team. I don't think anyone, at least media people that I've listened to, is completely confident in how good the Giants are going to be. Some positives for the team. Obviously, getting Brian Daboll from the Buffalo Bills is going to immediately increase the offense productivity. They were the absolute worst team. They had the least amount of touchdowns in the NFL last season. So I think as long as they can improve upon that, they're obviously going to be a better offense. And Brian Daboll really excels with scheming up wide receivers. I think he's excellent in the passing game, especially. I'm not convinced about the run game, but I think in the pass game he does a really good job of getting wide receivers open, especially down the field. I think that's where he excels as a play caller and play designer. Another positive I have for this team, I really think their offensive line is going to take a huge step forward this season. I think Andrew Thomas has kind of finally stepped into his own here, and he's really backing up where he was, his draft selection as the number 4 overall pick out of Georgia. I think he's really going to cement himself as a above average left tackle this season. I really liked Evan Neal, out of Alabama. Evan Neal, really liked him. I thought he was really a polarizing. Those top 3 offensive linemen, Ikwonu, Neal, and Cross, I kind of thought whichever one you take, you're going to be good. Neal, I thought, was probably the most polarizing of those because he's really big for an offensive lineman. He's 6'8", 337 pounds. That's pretty big for a tackle, and the concern with those guys is obviously how quickly they can move their feet. But I think he will really excel in this offense, and he's going to have a good rookie season. And I like their guards. I like Glowinski. I think he brings a great veteran presence to this offensive line. I think he'll be really good next to Evan Neal. And the only guy I kind of have some questions about, or a position I have questions about is left guard. Who's going to play that, and what is it going to look like? But other than that, I think their offensive line is good. Another positive, I think Wink Martindale coming over to this defense is going to be really awesome for this defense, and I think it's going to be a nice change to this division. It's a lot of teams don't really run this type of defense, so I think they'll be able to catch Carson Wentz off guard and Jalen Hurts off guard. So the only guy I don't think they'll be able to fool really is Dak Prescott, but that's just because Dak is so good. But I think some of the younger quarterbacks and Carson Wentz, who's kind of prone to making mistakes and not really being great at reading the defense, I think he will be I think Wink will be able to kind of really confuse those guys and get them to commit some turnovers. I like Adoree Jackson. I'm not really sure why the Titans traded him away. I thought he's always been really solid, and I mean, did he kind of live up to his draft billing? Probably not, but he was still really solid, and it's you don't really want to get rid of those really solid corners. So I always thought that was kind of weird. I like Aaron Robinson. Obviously, I like Bradbury more. I'm not sure why they traded away James Bradbury. I know they were struggling kind of with their cap a little bit, but still, I would have probably preferred them to keep him if they wanted to take a step forward. Because in this defense, you really need to have good corners, and Bradbury and Jackson would have been really nice, two great bookend corners to have. I think Aziz Ojulari is really going to take another step forward this season, especially as a pass rusher. He was an awesome pass rusher coming out of Georgia. I think he'll continue to kind of take steps forward. And obviously, Kayvon Thibodeau will be really, really great, I think, his rookie season. He's still, obviously now he's hurt. He's probably going to be out for 4 weeks, so he's going to miss probably the first 2 games, 2 maybe 3 games of the season, which is really unfortunate with that knee injury. But all I got to say about that is that's what happens in the NFL. You've got to see those tight ends coming across the formation. Low man wins. That's all I'm going to say. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, if he can develop some more pass rush moves, freak athlete, works really hard. I thought that information in the draft about him not being a hard worker or having interests outside of football, I always think that that's kind of dumb information and usually not true. So that was, of course, really unfortunate to hear all that stuff come out about him and then kind of have his draft position drop, because I really thought that he could have been the first overall pick and probably should have been a top 3 pick. I like in their their free safety, Xavier McKinney. I think he's going to have another great year this year, and as long as he can stay healthy, he'll be great for them. And my biggest concern with this defense is the linebacking group. Like Blake Martinez, I think he's really solid. When he was with the Packers, he always just seemed a tick too slow, especially to outside plays. And I know teams would always kind of take advantage of that with swing passes or wide receiver screens, things like that. And Blake Martinez is always, he would recognize it, but then just be a tick too slow. So hopefully, coming off of this injury this last season, he can kind of improve on that as well. Some other negatives, wide receivers. I think if this whole group was healthy and motivated, they would be one of the better wide receiver groups, young wide receiver groups in the NFL. I But from everything I've heard, especially about Kenny Golladay, which is really unfortunate, I really liked him with the Lions. I thought he was going to be a really good player moving forward. He just does not seem to be invested in this team at all. And he's not a player who can really demand a trade. I don't think he has that stature. So it was really unfortunate to kind of see him slow walking through the preseason and through what I've seen of training camp. Kadarius Toney has been hurt all preseason. He was hurt all last season. I'm really concerned about him moving forward. What we did see from him was really promising. I think he's a really, really interesting player. He's just hurt too much. And same with Sterling Shepard. I just don't know what I'm going to see with him. He's always hurt. When he's healthy, he's good. When he's hurt, it's often. So that is concerning for me. Tight end. I like Daniel Bellinger out of San Diego State. I just am not sure what he's going to look like in the NFL. I thought he was more of a kind of hybrid halfback tight end as opposed to someone in line. So we'll see how that works. Again, Brian Daboll doesn't really scheme up too many plays for the tight end anyways. So it's not, I guess Dawson Knox had a pretty big season, but that was later on in the season. I think Daboll really does kind of specialize in getting receivers down the field and specializing in that. And then obviously Saquon. What are we going to see with Saquon? If Saquon can stay healthy, he's really explosive, but he's kind of, his games are like a couple of 2 to 3 yard gains, and then he'll have 1 or 2 like 50, 60-yard touchdowns, and that's where he kind of gets all his production from. For a running back, that's kind of concerning. You really want running backs, or at least I prefer running backs who are kind of a little bit more consistent, and then, as the game goes on, then they can kind of, as the defense wears down, then they can kind of continue or get bigger gains and hit those home run plays. But Saquon is just so up and down. He's been hurt pretty much his entire career. And I think this is kind of the first year where people are really actually questioning Saquon. Before, it's always been, oh yeah, Saquon's going to be great. Saquon's going to be healthy. He's going to be the highlight of this offense. And we just haven't seen that up until this point. Ultimately, though, I think there's enough positives with this team. I think enough things can go right. If Daniel Jones can take just one more step, as long as he hasn't plateaued as a quarterback, I think this team can really be a lot better this season. I think the addition of Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale will really improve this team. I have them going 8-9. I could see them. That's kind of their ceiling, honestly, for me. I have them winning some games that they probably shouldn't win against, at Tennessee to open the season. I have them beating Dallas once, and then I have them beating Philadelphia. But, outside of that, I just don't see them winning more than 8 games, but I could see them, only winning 5 games. So if everything kind of goes south, if Daniel Jones doesn't get any better and doesn't progress, then I could see them losing more games than I have them winning here. Next, I have the Dallas Cowboys. I'm a little bit lower on this team than most people. I know a lot of people kind of probably have this team winning the division. I just don't see it. Not this year. I think they just have too many uncertainties. I think their offensive line now, especially losing Tyron Smith, I really just don't think that they can win this division with really only their only good offensive lineman being Zach Martin. And obviously Zach Martin's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but with just him, just just having a good right guard isn't good enough in the NFL. But still, there's a lot to like about this team. I think having Micah Parsons, obviously he's a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He's just so dynamic. I knew that he was the best defensive player coming out of the draft last season. I did not expect this. I did not expect he would be this much more explosive than every other player on the field. This much bigger, physical than everybody else. He is, I personally think, a once-in-a-generation type player. He is an Aaron Donald. He's a Jalen Ramsey. He is that player. He's a Deion Sanders. I really do. I think that highly of him. And he's going to be what carries this defense to being second in this division, I think. Another positive, obviously, Dak. Dak is awesome. Dak will, as long as he's in the NFL, Dak is going to be a top 10 quarterback, in my opinion. He's just so consistent. He's so strong in the pocket. He constantly makes the right decisions. I just am not, it's hard to put my finger on what exactly he could improve to put him over the top. I do think he has plateaued as a quarterback, but plateauing as a top 10 quarterback can win you a Super Bowl. I think that I do think that you can win a Super Bowl with a top 10 QB. Top 15 probably not, but top 10 I do think you can win a Super Bowl with a top 10 quarterback. He just constantly makes the right decisions. He rarely ever makes the wrong decision as a quarterback. He knows when to pull it down and run, and then when he does run, he's huge. He's got legs the size of tree trunks, and he likes to run over people. So I really, really like Dak as a player, and I think obviously he's one of the bright spots of this team. I also think CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup are going to be great when Gallup comes off of his ACL injury. He's going to be awesome. And CeeDee Lamb, I really do think, can be a number one wide receiver. I'd like to see, I just haven't seen the past 2 years with him. And, that could obviously be Amari Cooper, and Dak really liked Amari a lot. I just haven't seen CD. I've seen him have flashes here and there, but I haven't seen the consistency from him that I want to see. So I think this year he's going to get the majority of the targets because obviously their wide receiver depth is not fantastic, which I'll talk about later. I think CeeDee Lamb will really take that step and be a top 10 wide receiver. And I like the running backs, Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott. I would like to see them shift away from giving Zeke 70% of the carries and Pollard 30%. I'd like to see them go more 50-50 and give Pollard more of an opportunity in the passing game, maybe some 2 running back sets. That would be nice, and I think that's really good for this team. Some negatives. Obviously, talked about the offensive line already. I just don't think it's going to be good outside of Zach Martin. I am not sold on Terrence Steele. And I think Tyler Biadasz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm probably not, out of, I believe, Wisconsin. Yeah, out of Wisconsin. I'm just not sold on those 2 guys. And Connor McGovern, again, same thing. A lot of young guys who are just probably have played their best football already, and I don't think are going to get any better. I'm really in the NFL. You've got to win with the offensive line, especially when you want to focus on your running backs as for your offense. Like I think that they want to. You've got to have a better offensive line. Again, their wide receiver depth. I kind of touched on that earlier. Not sold on their wide receivers. Outside of CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, and whenever Gallup gets back, I like Jalen Tolbert. I liked him coming out of South Alabama, but he just seems like a deep threat to me. A lot. He reminds me a lot of MVS. As a player, I think he can beat you deep, and when he beats you deep, and if he catches the football, that's awesome. But how often is that happening? That's up for debate, and we'll see. The corners, I do not like their corner group, really at all. I know Trayvon Diggs made the NFL top 100 pretty high. I think he was like 27th. I thought that was ridiculous. I know he gets a lot of turnovers, and he does do a good job of mirroring wide receivers and kind of running their routes for them, but holy cow, does he get beat a lot. He just cannot. He's boom or bust, and he needs to be a lot more boom for this defense to be better. And I just, turnovers are a hard thing to replicate. But if he can do it, if he can get those turnovers, that would be great for them. But again, turnovers are hard to replicate. Anthony Brown, he's solid. He's okay. I like him. He's a little small, so he oftentimes will kind of get bullied on the outside. So again, I'm just not huge on their corners, but I do like their safeties. I like Malik Hooker, and I do like Jaron Kearse. So I think that they can kind of make up for the cornerback play. Another kind of negative is Mike McCarthy. As a Packers fan, I can tell you right away that Mike McCarthy is just not it. He's just not it for this football team, for really many football teams. I don't know what he does, because he doesn't call plays for the offense or the defense, and his clock management continues to be suspect. He continues to struggle with clock management. He did as the Packers head coach, and he has continued to do that in his first 2 seasons with the Cowboys. And again, they're a team that struggles with penalties. Mike McCarthy always talks about cleaning up the penalties. Well, if you don't call the offensive plays, you don't call the defensive plays, then you have to be able to clean up the team's penalties and have them be a disciplined football team, and they're not. So again, that's why I've got Mike McCarthy as a negative. He's done a lot in the NFL as a head coach and a play caller, but for whatever reason, he's just kind of fallen off of the deep end. So Dallas Cowboys, I have them going 9-8. I do think that their big win of the season is against Tampa Bay. The first game of the season, of I think the whole season. Actually, no, I believe it's that first Monday night game. Could be wrong, but I do have them beating Tampa Bay. It's kind of a surprise and upset, but after that, I just think that the poor offensive line is going to catch up with them, and they do have a relatively difficult schedule. Obviously they've got to play Philadelphia twice, they've got to play Cincinnati, they've got to play Green Bay, Minnesota, Indianapolis, Tennessee. So they've got a lot of good teams that they're going to play against, because they had that first place schedule going 12-5 last season. And I just don't think they're as good of a football team this year. So I've got them going 9-8. Could they win 10, 11 games? Potentially, if the Eagles, I think, are not very good, or, they find, or their defense plays out of their mind again. They get all those turnovers, and they end up being, a top 10 defense, top 5 defense again. So that would be one thing where I could see them winning more games. I don't really see them losing more than 9 or 8 games. I just think that Dak's too good. Their receiving, CeeDee Lamb is too good. Micah Parsons is too good. I think they've got too many outstanding star players for them to lose more than 8 games. And winning the division, I've got the Philadelphia Eagles. This division, the NFC East, they switch off division winners every single year. No team is consistent ever, but I do think the Eagles, they won 10 games last season. I think they'll win 10 games again this season, and they'll ultimately win the division. Again, I don't really like the NFC East this year. I just am not sold on any of these teams, but I do like the Eagles and the direction that they're heading. I think their wide receivers, A.J. Brown, best pickup of the offseason, I think, outside of the Raiders getting Devontae Adams. I think A.J. Brown is really going to help Jalen Hurts and his development. I think that was something that they were missing last season, was really a bona fide number one. I do think Devontae Smith can get there. I also have him as a positive for this team. I loved him coming out of Alabama. I thought he was Keenan Allen 2.0 and a little bit faster. So I think he can take another step forward. Dallas Goedert, I think, is one of the best tight ends in the NFL. He's going to get a ton of targets in this offense because Jalen Hurts loves to throw to him. So I really think their skill position players their skill position players and their offensive line are what's going to set this team apart from Dallas. I just think their offensive line with Jordan Mailata, Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson, they're just set. They're so good. They're going to be one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. Their defensive line is one of the deepest defensive lines in the NFL, and I think their pass rush is great too. I like Hassan Reddick quite a bit. I thought when they picked him up, that was a really good pickup for them. And obviously, the stalwart, Brandon Graham, doing it again. He's 34, going to be 35. He just continues to be good. Last season, he may have not had his best season in a while, but I think he'll jump back and he'll be a really good pass rusher for them this season. I really love their corners. Darius Slay, James Bradbury, who they got from the Giants, are going to be one of the better corner groups as well. They're just headed in the right direction. Darius Slay, I've always liked Darius Slay coming from Detroit. He always had great battles with Devontae Adams and Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. He's always been a thorn in the Packers side whenever he was with them. And obviously the pickup of James Bradbury, who is just a really solid second corner. He's going to be really good for this team. And on to the negatives. So I have Jalen Hurts as kind of a maybe negative. Right now I have him as a negative because the rest of this team is so good that I couldn't quite put him into the positive with the other skill position players, offensive line, defensive line players. I just don't think he's quite as good as them. But I do think he could be a positive. I obviously love how he runs the football. I think they're going to do a lot of design runs. They're going to do a lot of RPOs, things like that. And he's going to excel in those things. And then obviously play action off of that. He's going to be really good. My question with Jalen Hurts, and I think is everybody's question with Jalen Hurts, is can he maintain the consistency? Is he going to be consistent throwing the football down the field, intermediate, short? It's on all three levels. He's an inconsistent thrower, and I just am worried about that. I just don't know if he's going to progress or if he's plateaued. You know, he came out of college pretty old. He's already 24. So, you know, he's nearing his athletic prime, and, you know, if he can continue to make progression, I would definitely put him in the positives. Do I ever think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback? No. Do I think he could be top 15? Potentially, especially with how he runs the football. He just needs to be more accurate. His ball placement is really concerning, and he has the arm strength. I've seen him throw from, you know, the far hash to the sideline, and those outs. He can throw those, but he has to get more accurate throwing the football. His ball placement is just suspect, as I mentioned before. Linebacker. Their middle linebacker group is just not good. TJ Edwards, I think, has been pretty solid for them. Decent, below average to below average. So I do think that he's been okay, but they brought in Kaiser White. Awesome. 4th round pick out of West Virginia, played for the Chargers the past 4 years, hasn't been great. And then they also have Davion Taylor, who is not very good, was a 3rd round pick out of Colorado. He's just a little small for a linebacker for me, 225. He just is not going to hold up in the run game. But we'll see if he can, if any of those guys can kind of get better. But as of right now, I just don't think they're very good. And I do think that they're the weak point of this defense. And ultimately, I think Miles Sanders, I just don't know what to expect from Miles Sanders. I think was billed as being, Saquon Barkley like. I know he's compared to Saquon because obviously they both came from Penn State. I don't think they should have been compared. That wasn't fair to Miles Sanders coming out. He was ultimately picked in the second round, and I think they're just going to be running the football with Jalen Hurts more. And when that happens, when you've got a quarterback who can run, ultimately the running back struggles with production. So we'll see if he can capitalize on his opportunities. But right now, I'm just not super high on Miles Sanders. And also their defensive back depth. I don't think it's very good outside of James Bradbury and Darius Slay. Again, a lot of people or a lot of teams are kind of like that. Avonte Maddox is so up and down. He's either really bad or pretty good. So we'll see if he can kind of be a little bit more consistent. But as of right now, and I'm not huge on their safeties either. I don't, Anthony Harris coming from Minnesota, I thought he was great with Minnesota, but since he's been here with the Eagles, he just hasn't been great. And again, Mike Zimmer, as I was saying before with the Vikings, he made those safeties, those corners, and look really, really good. And people who have left that system have often not played as well. So we'll see. Marcus Epps, he's okay. Again, this defense is so talented. It's difficult. I'm kind of nitpicking here, especially with the safeties and their linebackers. But I just think everybody else on the defense is so good that, I have to pick out some negatives. Ultimately, I have this team going 10-7, like I mentioned earlier. I just am not super sold on them consistently beating good teams. I think they're going to play a lot of below average teams, so they'll get lots of wins. And obviously, teams in their division I think are below average. Washington, the New York Giants, and Dallas. I think Dallas is probably one of the most average teams in the NFL. They have, again, I think an average team in the NFL is, they have players kind of spotted throughout their roster, like really good players, but the depth isn't there and the offensive line isn't there. I think that's what separates average teams from good to great teams. So I think the Eagles will be a good team. I have them winning 10 games. Could they win 12 games? Potentially. Could they lose the division to the Cowboys and only win 7 games? Also, absolutely. They're a very volatile team, I think. But I do have them getting some upsets. I have them beating Green Bay later in the season. I think that's probably going to be their biggest win of the season. But ultimately, I have them kind of losing against more high-tier teams consistently. Next, we have the NFC South. So I've got the Carolina Panthers at the bottom of the NFC South. I don't see them. They're probably going to be the worst team in the NFL. Definitely one of the worst teams in the NFC. This team is just really barren right now. I don't like. I just am not sold on. I like 2-3 players on their team to be really good players. Outside of that, they're below average everywhere else. Below average, not even average. So some of the positive, J.C. Horn. I think J.C. Horn's going to take another step forward this year. I loved him coming out of the draft. He is big, physical, so good in press man. So good in press man. He was awesome coming out of South Carolina. So I think, again, if he can stay healthy, he was hurt for a lot of last season, so it's kind of difficult to gauge whether or not he's gotten better because obviously, again, he was hurt so much. I like their young offensive linemen. I like Ike Ekwonu, or Akeem Ekwonu, Ike for short. Akeem Ekwonu, out of North Carolina. Again, those three top offensive linemen, he was one of them. Pick your poison. Whichever one kind of you want, whichever one kind of fits your draft profile of what you like, take them. And I really like Ekwonu. Think he's an excellent run blocker. He's going to be great running in the run game right out of the bat. Brady Christensen, I really liked him last season. Coming out of BYU, he was a third-round selection. A lot of people had him as kind of a guard tackle hybrid. I saw him more as a guard. I just didn't think he was quite athletic enough to really be consistent at tackle. So they've got him playing left guard this season, and I think he's going to continue to take a step forward. I obviously like DJ Moore, and I think Terrace Marshall Jr. didn't really have a great rookie season, but, he's playing with Sam Darnold for a lot of the season. How good is he really going to be when your quarterback's Sam Darnold? Who I actually liked coming out of the draft. I like Sam Darnold quite a bit, but unfortunately, he just could not with the Jets and Adam Gase. I think that was really unfortunate for him to go to that team. So unfortunately, I just don't, obviously, and he got hurt this preseason, so he's obviously Baker is going to take that starting job. But going back to DJ Moore, I think he's going to get a ton of targets in this offense. He's going to have a ton of yards, ton of targets. He's a really good route runner again, and he's really strong. I think over the middle is where I think he kind of excels the most, is running those deep crosses and the deep overs. I think is really where he's best. Terrace Marshall, they've kind of got him pegged in the slot right now. I would move him probably to out the other boundary and then put Robbie Anderson in the slot. We'll see kind of what they do, but I think that he'll be really good number 2 wide receiver in this offense. Really fast, and I thought he actually had decent 3-cone time, decent start-stop for how tall he was and how fast he is. And another positive, Christian McCaffrey. If he can stay healthy, Christian McCaffrey is clearly the best player on this team. Bar none, not even close. And I like Brian Burns. I like DJ Moore. I like Ekwonu. Christian McCaffrey is a different level player. If he can stay healthy, this team, I think, could win some more games than I have them winning. Unfortunately, Christian McCaffrey doesn't stay healthy. He hasn't stayed healthy in a long time. So he's kind of in the positives, obviously, for how great of a player he is, especially in the running game, passing game. He's just great. He can do everything. But the reason I kind of have him also a little bit in the negative is he just doesn't stay healthy. So if he can stay healthy, he'll be really great this season. Negatives. Kind of the whole defense. Outside of J.C. Horn, I don't like C.J. Henderson that much. He unfortunately really hasn't taken a step forward. Miles Hartfield, their slot corner, kind of the same thing. Just those guys haven't gotten better since their time in the NFL. I think their safeties are okay. Jeremy Chin, he's good. He could get better, and that would be nice. Xavier Woods, I think, is kind of at his ceiling as an okay safety. Not going to be any better. But I just really don't like their interior. Matt Ioannidis is probably their best player. And outside of that, they just really don't have any depth. And I think Derek Brown could get better, but his first 2 years in the league, he just did not live up to his draft billing of the 7th overall pick coming out of Auburn. I thought he was going to be fantastic, but he just has not been great so far, unfortunately. Again, their offensive line, outside of Ekwonu, not very good. Taylor Moton's probably their only consistent player that they've had on the offensive line for the past couple years. He'll be okay, but their interior is not good at all. We'll see if that can improve, but I don't have, my hopes aren't too high for them. Another negative, I've got Baker. Baker is so confusing. I'm not sure what to think about Baker. Obviously, he was hurt for a lot of last season. I don't want to hold too much of that against him, but he was just not good. Just really, really not good. His flaws were so exacerbated by him being hurt, and that's concerning. And again, he's not very big. He's 6'1", 215. Yeah, he's a little bulkier, so you would think that he could take hits, but he's kind of been dinged up his whole career. I mean, he hasn't really been fully healthy since his rookie season. Even in 2020, he was a little dinged up for a little bit of that season. And I just don't think he's going to be great. I think he's one of those quarterbacks who needs talent around him to be great, and they just do not have a lot of talent. So ultimately, I have them going 2-15. I just don't see where they're going to win games. I think they don't have a great schedule either. I think their schedule is really difficult. They play the NFC West and the AFC West. Or sorry, excuse me. They play the NFC West, and looks like they're also playing the AFC North. So the NFC West and the AFC North, those are two pretty good divisions. Obviously, the NFC West is probably the best division in the NFC, and the AFC North is quite good as well. I do have them beating Cleveland for the first game of the season. I just think that they're going to surprise Cleveland, and with obviously no Deshaun Watson, I think they're juggling a lot of things right now. I just don't think they're going to be as good as everyone expects them to be this season, or as good as they were last season. So I think they can jump on Cleveland early, but outside of that, I just don't see them beating really anybody in the NFC West except potentially Seattle. And in the AFC North, all of those teams are really good, and I already have them beating Cleveland. I don't see them beating anyone in their division outside of Atlanta at home. I just think the Saints and the Bucs are too good. So I've got them going 2-15 right now. They could win a couple more games, but I don't see it. Next, I've got the Atlanta Falcons. A lot of positives with this team, surprisingly. When I was going through this roster and kind of going through kind of the young players that they drafted in the draft, I really like where this team is headed. I like their coaching staff quite a bit. I do think this season they're not going to be very good because obviously, when you have Marcus Mariota starting, you're just not going to be that great. I like Marcus Mariota as a guy, and I think that no one has said anything bad about him ever. I just don't think he plateaued as a prospect and just couldn't really get past his negatives of he's just not a risk taker. He doesn't throw the ball down the field, and when he does throw it down the field, usually it's a wrong decision. The positive skill position players. I love their skill position players. Kyle Pitts and Drake London specifically are going to be really awesome. Just two huge dudes. Kyle Pitts, not really an inline tight end. That's not what they brought him in to be. Can he develop into a guy who becomes a better blocker, and they can kind of inline him and run some different personnel lineups with him? Yeah, potentially, but right now you're going to want to line him up out wide or in the slot. I wouldn't put him in line. But outside, anyways, too many negatives about him. He's too good of a player to have that many negatives and talk that negatively about him. He's going to be awesome this season. I think he's going to get, again, over 1,000 yards. I think he's going to have multiple touchdowns. He's going to be fed in this offense. And if you're a fantasy person, I would draft him early. The only tight end I would draft above him is Travis Kelce. Other than that, I am drafting Pitts as the second best tight end. Next, obviously, Drake London. I think he's going to have a great rookie season. He got hurt again, which stinks. Coming out of the draft, he was also hurt. That's a little concerning for such a big wide receiver and a guy who's going to be playing on the outside. So that's a little unfortunate. And I like Cordell Patterson out of the backfield. He's probably one of the most interesting players maybe in the NFL, like ever. Going from basically being a return man, pegged as a return man for so long, and then kind of came out as had been better as a wide receiver, and then now people in Atlanta especially has kind of put him into this running back role. I think he's really excelled, and I think he's going to be really great for this offense. Another positive, I really like their outside corner, A.J. Terrell, who's young, out of Clemson. He's just consistently gotten better. I think he was one of the better corners in the NFL last season. Really good zone corner, I think, and again, they're going to play a lot of zone in this defense. They've got Casey Hayward and Isaiah Oliver, so a lot of zone in this defense. I think he's really good, and he's an ascending player. And I think their O-line is pretty good. I like Jake Matthews at left tackle, solid. He's never going to be great, but he's solid. And I like Chris Lindstrom. Sorry, not Alec Lindstrom. Chris Lindstrom at right guard. He's one of the better guards in the league. And I think Caleb McGarry is okay for them at right tackle. The negatives. Defensive backs. Their safeties are really concerning. They don't have anybody to play safety. So I don't know what they're going to do there. And I think middle linebacker outside of Deion Jones, who was awful last season, we'll see if he can kind of come back and be really good like he was for that Super Bowl team. We'll see. I don't know. My hopes aren't up. Usually linebackers don't get better. They get worse after they have one bad year. And then Rashaan Evans just hasn't really been this, hasn't lived up to his first round billing since being drafted, unfortunately. And I think really their only good defensive line player is Grady Jarrett. Everyone outside of Grady Jarrett, Lorenzo Carter is okay. And I think Taquan Graham is okay, is just not shown it yet. As a 5th round pick out of UT, I just don't see him getting better. I don't see this defensive line be very good this year. And then obviously Marcus Mariota, we already kind of talked about him, just not there as a quarterback. We'll see what this offense might be kind of exciting. There's going to be a lot of RPOs, going to probably look similar to what the Eagles are doing, but a little bit more of the outside zone scheme. So right now I've got them winning 4 games. You're going to go 4-13. I've got them actually kind of surprise upsetting New Orleans in week 1 at home. Outside of that, I don't see them winning too many games other than beating Carolina once and getting a couple surprise wins down the road because I think Kyle Pitts is that good and Drake London is going to be that good. So I think that outside of that, I don't really see them winning more than 4 games. That's probably their ceiling. They could win less games, though. Next in the division, I've got the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints, I'm pretty high on. I know a lot of people aren't in the media. It kind of just depends who you ask. Again, they're one of those polarizing teams. I think their defense is going to be awesome. Definitely a lot of names on the defense. You've got Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May, Marshawn Lattimore, Marcus Davenport, Cameron Jordan. All those guys are awesome. Demario Davis, how could I forget? Demario Davis at middle linebacker. They're going to be awesome. And I just don't see this defense not being good unless they get a ton of injuries, which they could. They are an older team. Tyrann Mathieu is definitely on the latter half of his career. He's 30. But outside of that, I really like Marcus May coming over from the Jets. I don't know why they let him go. And I think Paulson Adebo, their young corner who they drafted out of Stanford, is going to do really great next to Marshawn Lattimore. And they're just going to be a really good defense, I think. And they've got a great D-line. Another positive, Michael Thomas is back. that's awesome. If Michael Thomas is this year 80%, 70, 80% of what he was before he got injured, their offense is going to be quite a bit better. And I think drafting Chris Olave to give them more speed and then bringing in Jarvis Landry to work the slot, I think they're going to have a really, really, really talented wide receiver group. And obviously when you have Alvin Kamara, you're going to run the ball really well, great out of the backfield, just one of those guys who is always going to produce no matter what quarterback he has and no matter what the offensive line looks like. So kind of going into the negatives now, Jameis, again, is another one of those quarterbacks where I have him as a maybe negative, maybe positive. He can go either or. I really liked what I saw from him before he got injured last season. It really sucked when he got injured. And I really think this team could have been even better last season. So hopefully he comes back this season. I know he's been dealing with a foot issue in camp. Hopefully he comes back now and they kind of just take off here as the beginning of the season starts. Another negative, again, they're just an older team. You know, with these older teams bringing in all these names, you don't know how they're going to be health-wise. I just struggle to see this team being healthy all season, having everybody out there. Michael Thomas coming off the ankle injury, Tyrann Mathieu staying healthy the whole season, Marshawn Lattimore staying healthy all season, Demario Davis, Marcus May. Marcus May is still pretty young, but still. And also this offensive line, I think for the first time in a really long time, this offensive line is not that good. I heard today that Trevor Penning, their offensive lineman, they were potentially going to start at left tackle, but he was getting a lot of second-team reps. He also got hurt today, tore a ligament in his foot. That is never good for a tackle, especially a young tackle. You don't want to see that happen in their first season. So that's gonna their offensive line is gonna really struggle, I think, outside of Ryan Ramczyk. I just don't see it being that same Saints offensive line that just dominates year in, year out. So ultimately, I have this team going 11-6. I think a lot of people have them a little bit worse in the division than I do. Not worse in the division, but with a worse record. I just think that they've got Tampa Bay's number. So and they've always been a scrappy team. Dennis Allen coming in, I think is they're going to kind of maintain the same culture. Maybe Dennis Allen will let them be a little bit, or will be a little bit more strict with them than Sean was. But ultimately, I still really just love this defense. And I think they're going to win a lot of games, beat a lot of good teams with this defense. I've got them beating Tampa Bay, I've got them beating Green Bay, beating Cincinnati, and San Francisco. Sorry, not Green Bay. They're not playing Green Bay. I have them beating San Francisco, Philadelphia is what I meant to say, Cincinnati, and obviously Tampa Bay. So I just have them. I just think they're a little bit better than what a lot of people are giving them credit for, and I don't think that their schedule is that difficult. And winning the division, no surprise here, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Get right into the positives. Tom Brady, greatest quarterback of all time, unquestionably. Tom Brady is going to do what Tom Brady does. He's going to get rid of the ball quickly. He's going to get rid of the ball accurately, and he's not going to take any hits. It's just not going to happen. So as long as they've got Tom Brady, they're going to be fine. The wide receiver room, probably the best wide receiver room in the NFL. They've got Chris Godwin, Russell Gage, Mike Evans, Julio Jones. Doesn't get any better than that. Again, not much else I need to say there. Their offensive tackles, I think, are probably one of the best offensive tackle duos in the league with Donovan Smith and Tristan Wirfs. And then also they got Shaq Mason from the Patriots. I don't know how that happened. And it was, I believe, for like a 5th round pick. Shaq Mason's one of the best guards in the NFL, and somehow the Buccaneers got him for a 5th round pick. I don't know if that's just Tom Brady with some influence in New England. I don't know why New England would want to give him away when they've got a young quarterback, but they did. So their offensive line is going to be awesome. Obviously, their defensive backs, Anthony Winfield Jr., Carlton Davis, Murphy Bunting is awesome. Jamel Dean, they just have a lot of great defensive backs. I'm a little bit worried about Mike Edwards at safety, but other than that, I mean, if you're got to cover up one average safety with 3-4 outstanding defensive backs, you're going to be fine. Obviously, with the Todd Bowles defense, he's probably the best defensive coordinator, and now that he's the head coach, I think they're going to be even more defense-oriented. Their defensive line is awesome. Shaq Barrett has been great. He just continues to get better. He was always pretty good, but now he's just kind of just taken that next step ever since, they won the Super Bowl. I think it was that Super Bowl year where he really took that next step and became that elite pass rusher. I like Joe Tryon, Shoyinka. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I was just called him Joey Tryon. That's what he was through the draft process last year. So that's kind of what I call him at. I call him. He came from the Huskies. He was really a polarizing prospect as well. He didn't have his last year wasn't great. A lot of people thought that he could go higher in the first round, but his last year wasn't too great. So he kind of fell. I think if he takes another step forward, they'll have a really good pass rush again. And then obviously, you're bringing back Vita Vea, one of the best nose tackles in the NFL, if not the best nose tackle in the NFL. And then also you bring in Akeem Hicks from the Bears. He's a little older. He's going to be 33, but he's just been awesome his whole career. If he can stay healthy, he's going to continue to just make this defensive line impossible to run the ball against. Some of their negatives, not a lot, but their interior of their offensive line, especially at left guard and center, they've had a lot of injuries, ton of injuries. And then they had, I can't remember his name right now. He retired their left guard, so they're going with a rookie there, second round pick, Luke Goedeke. I liked him coming out of the draft, but they're young, and then they're starting, their second, potentially third center if Robert Hainsey can't get healthy. Another negative, Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette, I'm really on the fence about. A lot of people are really stoked that Leonard Fournette's going to be the featured back with Rojo gone now to the Chiefs. I'm not sold. I'm not sold quite yet. I need to see more than 1 year of productivity from him. Obviously, when they won the Super Bowl, that playoff run, he was really great. And then last season, he was very good. But I have to see one more season before I start to put him into the positives. And then another negative is Devin White. I think Devin White is good. I don't think he is as great as people think he is, or he's even near the level of Levante David. I think he has awesome sideline-to-sideline speed, but I don't think he is great with run fits. And I don't think his coverage is as good as a lot. I think he can cover tight ends, but I don't think he's great against wide receivers. Not many linebackers are. Regardless, their defense is still going to be fantastic. They're going to go 14-3. I think they've got a relatively easy schedule. I actually have them losing their first 2 games against Dallas. They're going to lose at Dallas and at New Orleans. Then they're just going to sweep through Green Bay, Kansas City, Baltimore, and then they're going to lose to the Rams in Week 9, and that's going to be their last loss, I think, of the season. And they're going to get the top seed in the NFC, in my opinion. I just think they're way too loaded. As long as Tom Brady is Tom Brady, they're going to be fantastic. All right. Already an hour and 40 minutes into this. Going to try and wrap this up and keep this under 2 hours, hopefully. Was not expecting this to be 2 hours. Might cut this into 2 episodes. We'll see. But for now, we're going to go into the NFC West. The last place team I have is the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are very clearly in a transition period. I don't think anyone would doubt that. Obviously, when you get rid of one of the best, not get rid of, when you trade one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, you're going to be worse. And they're clearly in a rebuild period. I think that they are probably going to want to, based on the moves that they made this offseason and in the draft, they're preparing to get one of those top quarterbacks coming out of the draft this season. So some positives for the team. I think DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are still one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. They're both really good wide receivers. I don't think either of them are top 10 wide receivers anymore. I think DK Metcalf is just outside of that top 10 range, and I really like Tyler Lockett still. So I think both of those guys are going to still put up numbers for this team, and they're obviously going to drive this team. I really like their young offensive tackles. I think they knocked it out of the park, getting Charles Cross at pick 9 and then getting Abe Lucas in the 3rd round. Those guys are going to be great offensive tackles for 10, 15 years. I just do. I liked both of them a lot coming out of the draft. So I think if those guys just continue to progress, don't have any major setbacks health-wise or anything like that, as long as they don't have any type of setbacks in their development, they're going to be great. I think Rashad Penny is going to take another step forward this year. They're going to have to rely on him a lot because I think he was really good in that later half of the season, and I think he's going to continue to kind of build on that, especially with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas coming in. I think their offensive line is actually going to be better than what it was last season. Next, safeties. I like their safety duo, Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. I know Jamal Adams gets kind of a bad rap because he's not a great coverage safety, but he's going to, and they are switching to this kind of too high safety look. As opposed to the single high cover 3 safety look that they ran for years and years, and that the Legion of Boom was made famous and everybody tried to copy. They're going away from that, but I think Jamal Adams will be pretty good in that role, and I think he might actually kind of will have one of his better seasons. Some negatives: the offensive line, young. Are the tackles, do I think the tackles are really great? Yeah, I do, but also they're young and they're going to take their lumps. It's just going to happen. I think Gabe Jackson, Austin Blythe are the only 2 guys above 30 on this offensive line, and neither of those guys are particularly great. So I think their offensive line is still going to struggle. It's probably going to be a bottom half offensive line, but I do think it will be better than last season. Their defense outside of safety is just rough to look at. Maybe Jordan Brooks can turn into something. I thought he was drafted way too early. I thought he was a 2nd or 3rd round guy. He's been kind of thrust into that starting role to kind of be a star right away for that defense, and he's just not ready. I think they've got 2 corners. Artie Burns is okay, and Sidney Jones, who obviously I really liked coming out of the draft, and he's just kind of, unfortunately, he's just not been able to stay healthy and really get into a stride of where I think he can be as a player. So obviously, and their linebackers, their defensive line, LJ Collier, I don't even want to get into the defensive line. They're just not good. Geno Smith is their starting quarterback. It's a negative, unfortunately. Geno's bounced around the league a lot. Obviously, he started with the Jets and really had a rough go of it at the Jets. I don't really think he got a fair shake with the Jets either, unfortunately. And he's won the starting job, according to Pete Carroll today, over Drew Lock. It's really unfortunate that Drew Lock couldn't beat out Geno Smith. I really thought he had some talent coming out of college, but he just could not limit the mistakes. Couldn't make good decisions. And I think he's got a really strong arm and he can really throw off platform, but just couldn't limit the mistakes. And their receiver depth. Outside of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, you've got Dwayne Eskridge, who is young. And I think they're probably high on him, but it's rough. It is rough past that. So I just don't see the Seahawks being any better than last place in this division this year. Clearly rebuilding, clearly going to be looking for a new quarterback in the draft, high in the draft. And I have them going 3-14. I have them picking up a game versus Atlanta, Arizona, and Carolina. Outside of that, they've got a tough schedule as well. And obviously in their own division, 3, I think, really good teams. And they're also playing the NFC South, which is going to have New Orleans and obviously Tampa Bay, and I just don't see it. And and they're also playing the AFC West, which is the best division in football. They're not going to win a single game against the AFC West unless something catastrophic happens to one of those teams. I don't see them winning more than 4 or 5 games. I definitely see them at the bottom of this division. Next, I've got the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals, I think this division's not really very shocking to most people. These teams have kind of cemented their place, I think, where they're going to end up. The Arizona Cardinals, I wish I could be more into this team because I really do like Kyler Murray and I really do like their wide receiver group, but outside of that, there's just not much. There's not much. I just don't see it. Obviously, Kyler Murray's going to be a positive. I think he's really good. Has the opportunity to continue to be a top 10 quarterback in this league and really maybe even push for top 5. But I just don't think this team is very well coached. I don't like the air raid scheme very much in the NFL. I just don't think it works. I think these defenses are too smart and they're too fast. But like I said, I really like Kyler Murray. I really like the receivers. I did like that they got Marquise Brown. They kept AJ Green. On the defensive side of the football, not a lot to like outside of Budda Baker and Byron Murphy. Budda Baker, I think, is one of the better safeties in the league. He's going to struggle in run defense. It's just not very big, but I do think he's a really good free safety. I think he has excellent timing. He has excellent route recognition. He's just a really smart player. Byron Murphy, I think, will take a step forward this year. He's kind of, unfortunately, since he's been drafted out of Washington, he's just kind of been a middling to below average quarterback or corner. And I think I think this year he'll take a step forward. But outside of that, J.J. Watt is just old. Marcus Golden is old. I just don't see too much there. And their linebackers, I like Zaven Collins quite a bit. And I liked Isaiah Simmons, both those guys coming out of the draft, but they just have not produced. They have not been as good as their draft billing, unfortunately. And another negative, Hopkins is going to be suspended for the first 7 games. So I just don't see this team winning more than 7 games. And I think that's their high end. I really do. Not only are they going to again, they're playing the AFC West. They're also playing the NFC South and they're playing the NFC West. I just don't see a lot of easy games for this team to win, or even, playing teams of similar caliber. I just don't see it, and I don't see them winning those games. I think their highlight wins, they're going to play Philadelphia and beat Philadelphia. I think they're going to beat Minnesota, and outside of that, I have them losing 10 games. So I think 7-10 really is their ceiling. I do think they can, be scrappy again and potentially maybe win 8 games, 8-9 games if Kyler Murray just goes crazy. but I think 7 is their ceiling. Next, I got the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco 49ers are an extremely talented football team everywhere. Every single position, every line, just very talented. Their skill position group is probably one of the better skill position groups in the NFL, with George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk, who I think is going to take a step this year. He said that he was finally out of the doghouse with Kyle Shanahan, which I hope, because last year I think there was some wasted potential there. Their offensive tackles, Mike McGlinchey is really good offensive tackle, and I think Trent Williams is either the best or second best offensive tackle in the NFL, especially when he's healthy, and he's been healthy ever since he got moved from Washington now to San Francisco. He's been healthy, and he's been really, really good. This defense is loaded, absolutely loaded. Joey Bosa, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. They got Travarius Ward on the outside from the Kansas City Chiefs, who I think is going to be an upgrade. And they got CJ Mosley, who I really like as well. So they're just absolutely loaded. Fred Warner is, I think, the best inside linebacker in the NFL, really bar none. Dude is just an extremely smart football player, extremely physical, talks all the time, gets in people's face. Just really a lot to like about this defense. And obviously they've got Kyle Shanahan. They've got the best outside zone, play action, play designer, offensive play designer in the NFL, bar none. I do think, again, he struggles with some game management things. Timeouts, he really struggles with. I think he kind of struggles with when to go for it. And again, this kind of could just be because he had Jimmy Garoppolo. We'll see. But I do think he does struggle with some game management. But outside of that, when it comes to just play design, he's the best, bar none. Negatives. Obviously, I've got to put Trey Lance here in the negatives. Not because I think Trey Lance is going to be bad. That's actually the opposite of what I think. I think Trey Lance is going to be very good, just not right away. Just not this year. At least the beginning of the year. Maybe later he'll kind of get into the swing of things, but he just does not have enough experience as just being a quarterback. Just hasn't not, I think in North Dakota State, he won a lot of games, but they ran the football a lot. And I think it's going to be a really steep learning curve for him starting in the NFL. The interior of the offensive line, I think Aaron Banks is not great. Jake Brendel, and then they're going to start with Spencer Buford from University of Texas San Antonio. Just not sold on their interior offensive line. But again, they have such a great offensive coach, play designer, run game designer. They're going to be fine. And I think the one weak point on their defense is their safeties. I'm not super sold on their safeties yet. They could prove me wrong. They were really good last season. We'll see if they can kind of continue that trend this season, but I'm not entirely sold on them. And then outside of that, kind of their defensive back depth. Outside of Travarius Ward, CJ Mosley, you really struggle to find guys past those two guys. So I think if one of those guys gets hurt, they're kind of be in the deep end. But again, when you've got Nick Bosa, Drake Jackson, Eric Armstead, Dre Greenlaw, Fred Warner, you're going to be okay, I think. And then also I think their running back health. I don't know Elijah Mitchell, what his situation is. Apparently Trey Sermon out of Ohio State's been really good in the preseason and in training camp. I would think that he takes the next step and becomes the starter because of Elijah Mitchell's health. We'll see. Ultimately, I have them going 10-7. I could see them winning 12 games, maybe possibly 13 games. But I just think with Trey Lance, they're going to kind of struggle against really good defenses, really complex defenses with really good pass rushes. And so I just don't think he's quite ready yet and I think the team is ready to take the division from the LA Rams, but with Trey Lance, I just don't see it yet. And last but not least, I have the LA Rams. Obviously, a lot to like about the Rams, defending Super Bowl champions. They just have high quality star players at every single level of their team. Maybe outside of offensive line, although I really like Rob Havenstein. I think he's very good. I think he was a gem for them last season that they found, and I think he'll continue to get even better. Skill position players, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, Cam Akers, Tyler Higbee, the list goes on. Those are just their main guys. I think that they just don't really have any weaknesses when it comes to skill players. Each guy does their own thing, and they're all really good at that thing. So, again, they're going to put up a lot of points with Matt Stafford. Obviously, Matt Stafford is a plus for this team. Top 10 quarterback. Can potentially, pushes for top 5 a lot of, especially last season, he pushed for top 5, and some of those years in Detroit, he definitely pushed as a top 5. So he'll continue, I think, to just be really good with Sean McVay. Some negatives, though, about the team. Not a whole lot, but there are some things. I'm really concerned what I've heard about Matt Stafford's elbow. He's kind of had health issues in the past and arm issues in the past. So if he's got like some type of elbow thing, they said it was more akin to a baseball pitcher's injury than kind of like Dak's shoulder injury last season, where it was like, what? That's kind of weird for them to say that. That's kind of what they're saying about Stafford's elbow. They've got a really young left tackle in Joseph Noteboom. So I'm not super sold on how great he's going to be next season with Witwer gone and him having a full season. We'll see. Their depth outside of their star players, Jalen Ramsey, obviously, Bobby Wagner, Aaron Donald, not great. Leonard Floyd's good. Greg Gaines is good. Again, they're good up front and they're good, corners, but they're not great, and that could be a little concerning, especially if one of those guys gets hurt. And their safeties are all right. I like Jordan Fuller. I think he does his job well, and Taylor Rapp, kind of the same thing, but they're just not spectacular. Ultimately, I have them going 13-4. I think they're going to be second in the NFC. Yeah, they're just the best team in this division. I definitely think that they can repeat as Super Bowl champions. Do I think they're going to be undoubtedly the best team in the NFC this season? No. So ultimately, for the playoffs, I have the first seed being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the second seed being the Los Angeles Rams, the third seed being the Green Bay Packers, the fourth seed Philadelphia Eagles, fifth seed New Orleans Saints, 6th seed Minnesota Vikings, and I have San Francisco getting in as the 7th seed. And that will do it for the first episode of the Paul Witwer Football Show. Again, if you like the podcast, please like the video and leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe to the Paul Stops Here YouTube channel and visit thepaulstopshere.com for more content like this. Ultimately, this episode went a little longer than expected. The next week, I will be going over my predictions for the AFC, and I'll try to make it a little closer to 1 hour than 2 hours. I can't wait to see you all next week on the Paul Witwer Football Show.